Right, so much coverage continues to come out of the United States as the protests against the genocidal Israel regime continue to be seen across social media, playing out in real time as the police have invaded university campuses and reportedly have actually stood aside to allow pro-Zionist counter-protesters to physically attack those protesting against the genocide in Gaza. But above all, protesting the links their universities may have through their business links to the Israeli regime, and how they may be benefiting from a nation committing some of the worst atrocities many of us have ever seen. Just how far will things end up going? How much further escalation will we see in these US attacks against their own citizens for daring to hold a viewpoint others do not like? That isn't democracy, and what is being defended is utterly indefensible. However, here in the UK, where similar protests have been taking place in universities up and down the country, legal notices have been sent to the universities themselves if they too have been identified as having pro-Israel ties. And never mind countering their protests, if they don't address these links, they now face prosecution for criminal liability. That is what I call supporting student protest. How about we see some of the same in the US then? Right, so US violence on university campuses continues to shock and appall people bearing witness to the scenes being recorded on social media, being broadcast by eyewitnesses and the people being attacked, as pro-Israel counter-protesters drive that violence against students peacefully protesting their university's ties to the Israeli regime, demand a say in ending those ties, those links that they do not wish to be associated with. And the thought of ever standing against Israel, no matter what they do, for some people is just utterly anathema to them, to the point they are prepared to get violent, to invite violence, and to drive police intervention. In the last several days, we have seen, for example, at Northeastern University, the Daily Beast reported that 100 protesters were arrested because someone was heard to shout a phrase implying the unaliving of people of Jewish persuasion, I'll put it like that to avoid getting censored, which gave the police cause to go in and make arrests, yet not actually of the person who said said statement, because as footage ended up showing, that person was actually holding an Israeli flag and was amongst the counter-protesters. At the University of California, a young man called Aidan Doyle, he's a YouTuber as well, took to social media to explain how he had been trying to stop Zionist counter-protesters from removing a barricade, which resulted in him being pulled in amongst them, where he recounts them being set upon, being hit with a rock, was hit in the leg with a hammer, slashed at his arm, and pepper sprayed him. He also commented on seeing 19-year-old girls having fared far worse, their faces covered in blood. Despite all of that, he was committed to returning, calling for peace in Palestine and the dismantling of the Israeli regime. Now, there will certainly be people watching this and thinking, well, yeah, whatever, you would say that, Damo. He would say that as well. We know whose side you are both on this, to which I'd argue that if you're the sort of person to sneer at others who simply want the genocide to end, the loss of life to end, you need to have a long, hard look at yourself, and by all means check out Aidan's face and injuries on his YouTube channel, Aidan Doyle Politics. As bad as most of what we are witnessing is, there has been some good news. There has been some success on the students' part in the US. For example, Brown University is going to hold a vote on their students' divestment demands in October. So they have now dismantled their camp. They don't need it anymore. They've won. People power can have an effect, though, of course, let's see how that vote goes before we celebrate too much. Many of the people on these campus protests, not just students, but lecturers and professors as well, are themselves Jewish. And this is what is upsetting the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu the most, because it undermines his arguments that these campuses are not safe spaces for Jews, just as we've seen the same false reasoning levelled against the Palestine protests in London each weekend, the Gideon Falters of this world. But of course, the student protests have spread to UK campuses too. Campus camps, like those we've seen in the US, have now been set up at unis here, including in Manchester, where students have set up what they are calling the somewhat long-winded but very much on-point camp called the Manchester Resistance Camp for Palestine to pressure University of Manchester to cut its ties with Zionist entities and weapons manufacturers. Their demands are that the university end its partnership with BAE Systems, who make parts for Israeli F-35 jets, and to end its ties with Tel Aviv University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. More camps besides this one in Manchester have popped up too. Bristol, Leeds, Sheffield, Newcastle, more apparently coming in Swansea, Lancaster, Edinburgh. It's becoming a growing movement here as well, and potentially a growing problem for those here still ardently on the side of the Zionist regime, not least the universities themselves, So could we end up seeing scenes such as those we're witnessing in the US? Well, you could never rule anything like that out completely, but the students here in the UK have something on their side that those in the US don't seem to necessarily have on theirs, and that, weirdly, is the law, or at least some people acting on behalf of it. As of yesterday, the International Centre of Justice for Palestinians, or ICJP, which is based here in the UK, based in London, had written to 82 of the 140 British universities, warning them that their university officers could have committed a criminal offence if their institutions had profited from investments linked to weapons that have been used to commit war crimes, investments these universities have. British universities, just like their American counterparts, also invest money in various companies, have shareholdings, generate returns for the university from the said investments. Therefore, divestment demands from students should hardly be surprising. But between these 82 institutions, there are investments not just in BAE Systems, as aforementioned, as is the case in Manchester, but also in Elbit Systems, who, for example, built the drone used to kill the World Central KitchenAid workers some weeks ago now. And also Caterpillar, who, of course, supply plant equipment to the regime, bulldozers and JCBs and the such like. Any British university with investments in any company seem to be profiting from Israel and what it is doing in Gaza, risks, of course, being found complicit in that. The ICJP's senior legal officer, Dania Abul-Haj, told Middle East Eye that investment in these companies was already morally bankrupt. In the current circumstances, it is beyond belief that universities, which are educational institutions, paving the way for future generations of leaders and politicians, would continue to invest in them. And it is. If I knew I could be profiting from a nation committing such widespread genocide that was acting in such an indiscriminate and inhumane manner, I wouldn't want to touch them with a barge pole. But then I wouldn't have wanted to invest in a nation which is an illegal occupier and oppressor of other people's lands, as Israel certainly has been since 1967. You have to think about this for a minute too. It shouldn't just be the students appalled by what is happening in our universities here, but all of us as well. All these kids who go to university, they end up paying enormous sums, rack up enormous amounts of student debt. The funding that they pay into the universities for their tuition initially is coming from the public purse. It's our money, isn't it? Knowing that the university in question might be using that to invest in a company aiding in the genocide of Gaza right now, are you happy about that? Is that good use of your money? As far as kids looking at going to university, I dare say, if there wasn't so much competition for places, this might be a bigger issue. But it would, I imagine, certainly affect some kids' choices as to where they choose to go for their further education, if they end up finding out one of their options is a potential investor in genocide versus another option who might not be. Will British universities act to divest then, or would they rather get dragged to court and it possibly being made very public the extent of their Israeli investments? Seems a no-brainer to me to divest and do away with it before too much comes out. But then pro-Zionists don't appear to let rational thought dictate their actions. I guess we'll see just how pro-Israel some of these institutions are by what they choose to do next. Of course, how much you'll hear about that is another matter, with the media seemingly intent on burying a lot of this news. And even if they do cover it, what mainstream slant will they put on the story, seeking not so much to just report the news, but to shape opinion instead? They seem to have few qualms about complicity in many cases, as this video recommendation will tell you all about. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.